Welcome to the Book Show, a celebration of reading and writers. I'm Joe Donahue. Sadeqa Johnson is the award-winning author of 4 novels, including Yellow Wife. Her latest, The House of Eve, is a Reese's Book Club pick and an instant New York Times bestseller. 1950s Philadelphia 15-year-old Ruby Pearsall is on track to becoming the first in her family to attend college, in spite of having a mother more interested in keeping a man than raising a daughter. But a taboo love affair threatens to pull her back down into the poverty and desperation that has been passed on to her like a birthright. Eleanor Quarles arrived in Washington, D.C. with ambition and secrets. When she meets the handsome William Pride at Howard University, they fall madly in love. But William hails from one of D.C.'s elite wealthy black families, and his parents don't let just anyone into their fold. With their stories colliding in the most unexpected of ways, Ruby and Eleanor both make decisions that shape the trajectory of their lives. Again, the name of the new novel is The House of Eve, and it's a pleasure to welcome Sadeqa Johnson to this week's book show. What a pleasure. Thank you very much for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
I really enjoyed this novel on many fronts and for many reasons, but give me a sense of what brought you to this particular tale of these 2 young women.
Well, after I finished Yellow Wife was my first historical fiction novel, and I knew that it was the best that I had to offer. And the question that kept going through my head was, how do you better your best? And that was sort of a scary thing, but this character just kept coming to me. I knew her name was Ruby. I knew she was 15. I knew that she had a body shaped like a Coca-Cola bottle, that she was in sexual danger, that
Hmm.
she had a mother who wished she had never been born. And that got me thinking about my own family history.
How so?
Well, my grandmother told me that she was the black sheep of our family, that she had gotten pregnant with my mom at 14 and she had her at 15. She was unmarried and she was shamed. There was no husband in sight. It was the early 1950s. And so she hid her pregnancy from everyone, even to the daughter who she had. And so my mom tells me she didn't know my grandmother was her mother until she was in the 3rd grade. At that point, she had lived with her grandmother and it had never been openly discussed. And it got me thinking about what types of opportunities my grandmother had, being a Black woman growing up in North Philadelphia with very little resources. What options did she have when she found herself pregnant and unmarried? And that thought led me to do some research, and I came across these maternity homes, homes for unwed women.
You write in the author's note about your grandmother becoming pregnant at 15 in 1955, which is, of course, important. And your grandfather was light-skinned and affluent, while your grandmother was mahogany brown, as you say, and from the lower class section of North Philadelphia. You deal a lot, not only, of course, with how these women deal with the pregnancy, but also with skin color as well as racism within their own community.
I find that I'm always trying to unpack the way the world is working. And, in my own family history, like oil and water, my grandparents were not intended to mix. Him being very light skinned, her being mahogany brown, them being from different sides of the track. And I thought that was interesting. And as I went into our history, I found a book called Our Kind of People by Lawrence Otis Graham, where he talks about these generations of Black families, Black wealthy families that can trace their education and their wealth back 2 and 3 generations. And this book spanned from like the 19, Reconstruction up through the 80s and the 90s. And I thought, well, wow, these people exist. And how did they operate within each other? And I saw that, they didn't let just anyone into their fold. You needed to be educated. You needed to have the right last name. You needed to have, hair as straight as a ruler, skin lighter than a paper bag. And I thought, well, what would happen if my character Eleanor comes to DC not knowing anything about colorism? She's going to a historical Black college and university, Howard University.
Right.
She steps foot on the campus and she finds these things out. How does she maneuver in this new world that she knew nothing about?
And as we meet her, she is trying to get into a very exclusive sorority, and it's prestigious, and can't quite figure out why she is not being chosen.
Yeah, because she doesn't know, that Black folks separate themselves by color. And I got that little tidbit from Toni Morrison. I was watching The Pieces I Am, which is her documentary, and she said growing up in Ohio, Black folks were so busy getting along with everybody that they didn't have time to pit themselves against each other. And so it wasn't until she got to the university that she realized that colorism existed. And I open up with Eleanor feeling that right away in the very first chapter that, oh my goodness, I had no idea that this had a play and where I could move and what sororities I could join.
So where does that leave William, who is part of Washington, D.C.'s elite and has the world before him, but he does not concern himself with such issues and falls for Eleanor?
Yeah. William hails from one of the oldest Black elite families in Washington, D.C. In fact, his mother sort of controls the pulse of this very elite group of people. And, I get a sense that William enjoys, the good life that his family is accustomed to, but he also
Right.
loves Eleanor. And so he's constantly sort of going back and forth between being very comfortable in this world that Eleanor is not comfortable or accustomed to, but also wanting to be in this relationship with her.
I got that impression in reading the novel because there would be moments of great tension between his mother and his family and Eleanor, and then he would insist that they go to brunch the next week. That they just sort of do things normally the way they always do.
Yeah, and Eleanor is very uncomfortable at these brunches, as you saw. And that's actually one of my favorite scenes in the whole book is the first time she goes to his family's home and she's at this brunch and she makes a mistake about the people who she sees in the house.
Right. And so talk about that. The mistake being made is that they're white.
Or she thinks they're white, but they're
Right.
really
They're
they're really
not.
white faced. They're
Yes.
really white presenting Black people. So that was something that I came across also in my research was that, the proximity to whiteness sort of made this elite group feel that they were better than and they only intermarried each other and they wanted to keep their skin and their blood as white as possible. And so when a person like Eleanor comes into the mix, not only does she not fit, she has a hard time mixing in. And again, this was something that she had not experienced before. So as she's moving through the house and she's listening to these different conversations, her first thought is, does William's parents have any Black friends?
Sadeqa Johnson is our guest. The name of the new book is The House of Eve. When it comes to Ruby, this is a different situation. Although, of course, there are similarities, and you alternate between these two narratives and these two wonderful characters. But Ruby, of course, is looking for a better life and determined to be the first in the family to go to college.
Yes. And Ruby is trying to escape generations of poverty. Unlike William, she's on the opposite end of the spectrum. She comes from a family who they have only had those lower menial cleaning jobs, cleaning for white families. And Ruby would be the first to sort of break that. But she has some obstacles in her path. She has a mother who is not interested in anything that will get Ruby to where she needs to go. She's more interested in having a relationship with a man who is probably no good for her than making sure that her daughter can have car fare to get to the program that is
Mm.
is intended to change Ruby's life.
Ruby then falls for Shimmy Shapiro, who is white, he is Jewish, and oh, by the way, he's the landlord's son.
And oh, by the way, completely off limits.
And nobody approves of this particular
Nobody.
relationship except for them.
Yeah, my favorite line is when Aunt Marie tells her that she has pulled a seat up to to a game that she can't win. Cut it off right now.
Oh, I love that character. The aunt character is just delightful. And Eleanor's roommate, these are women who are helping and sort of giving the sage advice of, oh dear, you have to look at this.
Yeah, I always find that you need at least one sidekick. You need at least one person who's going to tell you right from wrong. And for Eleanor, it's definitely Nadine. And for Ruby, it's actually her Aunt Marie, who is, her mother's sister. She is, I love everything about her. She is a cross dressing lounge singer. She's a numbers runner. She carries a gun and she don't take no stuff from nobody. And she is, the person who is in Ruby's corner and making sure that Ruby gets what she needs to get to reach her dreams.
The thing that is so beautiful about this book is the characters that you care very much about, but they're flawed, but they're very complex and they're fascinating to read about.
Thank you. I always tell my writing students that if you don't have flawed characters and they don't have obstacles that they need to overcome, then you don't have a book.
What is the challenge in setting that up? Do you still find that to be difficult to ultimately achieve?
Always start off with an idea for a story. And, for The House of Eve, I had the idea that was based on my grandmother. So I knew I wanted to write about these maternity homes. I knew I wanted to write it from a Black woman's perspective, but I wasn't quite sure how I could get that done. So in the beginning, it always feels to me like I have all these beautiful Christmas ornaments, but I don't have the tree to sort of hang it on. And so those are my plot points. I have to figure out, like, well, Ruby wants, what does she want more than anything in the world? She wants to be educated. Well, what are the obstacles in her way? And so I sort of need to come up with those up front so that I know what I'm working against as I'm moving through the story. I always say that, bad things have to happen to good characters or you're not going to enjoy the book. I want to protect them. I know my readers want them to be protected, but it's not going to be as entertaining.
As far as protecting them, you want them to go out into the world and realize what is really there. You're guiding it, which brings these well dilemmas that are not easy in any case to deal with.
Oh yeah. I mean, some of the challenges that these characters in this book have to overcome are really big, but they're also saying something important about our society. I like to look at where we are in history. This book takes place between the late 1940s and early 1950s, and it says, a lot of very specific things about colorism, about racism, about classism, about alcoholism. I have a lot of isms in this book.
I want to read a line that you write that I think is just beautiful and so impactful. And it is Ruby is shopping at a department store, and an incident takes place. And you write, knowing about racism and being abused by its wrath were two different things. Mechanically, I followed my aunt to the bus stop and would take us back to our cage in North Philadelphia, where it had been decided for us that it is where we belonged, crammed together like pigs in a stall so tight it was impossible to dream or breathe. Every
Mhm.
single day we had to fight for food, for car fare, and this trip downtown had shown me that we even had to fight for what we should have for free, our dignity. That says a lot.
I love that section of the book because every person of color will remember the very first time you felt racism being hurled directly at you. And I don't think people know the impact of their words and their actions and how long they stay with the person that you've afflicted. And I wanted to highlight and show that in the story so that maybe people will be a little bit more careful as they move through the world, the things that they say and the way they treat people.
Again, we're speaking to Sadeqa Johnson, who is the author of the new book, The House of Eve, on this week's book show. I was fascinated by another character, and tell me the backstory here. Eleanor works with an archivist at the Howard University Library, and the work they do. By the way, she's a really cool character and very helpful to Eleanor. Give us a sense of how this archivist came into the story.
Well, I've always been a lover of the library. I was the girl who went to the library every Monday in the summertime, and I would check out 7 books, and I read a book a day, and then I would go back the following Monday and get more books. So I've always had this librarian love. And when I was trying to figure out what Eleanor's job was going to be, because I knew she had to work, I thought natural fit, she would work at the library. Well, while I was researching Howard University's library, I came across a woman named Dorothy Porter Wesley. And Dorothy Porter Wesley spent over 40 years amassing the largest collection of Black artifacts, articles, letters, pamphlets, diaries, books, art, music. She called it her collection, and it's housed at the Moreland Spingarn Research Center within Howard University. She was known to root around in people's smelly basements and dig through their dusty attics. She said that she would find treasures that the untrained eye would see as trash. She did not have a large budget to pull this center together, so she depended on help from all over the world. People would send her stuff and send donations. And right now, that collection is still available for viewing, and it is the largest in our country.
You bring us these wonderful, vibrant stories about real characters, whether it be Satchel Paige, or Dinah Washington, or Freddie Washington, or Phyllis Wheatley, and they're fascinating because they are brought to us while your two main characters are struggling, but then you show us this success of those who came before them.
I always try to honor as many real people in my historical fiction that I can. It feels a little bit sneaky, like I'm feeding you history, but I'm entertaining you at the same time, so you don't quite feel like I'm preaching or I'm teaching, right? And so that's always my goal when I'm writing historical fiction. And there's so many wonderful people who are forgotten, who have not had a voice, who people, just don't know about. I think when Black History Month comes around, my daughter says, Mommy, we study the same 4 people, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Jesse Owens, and Rosa Parks. And these people, of course, have made a contribution, but there are so many others who no one ever gets to talk about. And so I sort of see it as my job to shine a light in those dark spaces that we haven't explored, but also to give a voice to those who did not have a voice. And that's what I try and do with my historical fiction.
A spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. Not that history is medicine, but it's certainly more palatable and told in this way.
Absolutely.
Give us a sense of the men in this book, because they come out better than most men in women's fiction.
Hmm. Just looking at this period of history, I am right now listening to Lessons in Chemistry. And it seems to me that this time, the 50s, the men always sort of came out on top. And it was the women who usually had to bear the brunt of a lot of these decisions. We're talking about motherhood. We're talking about sex before marriage. We're talking about maternity. We're talking about maternity homes. We're talking about, the view of what a woman's place was in the 50s. And so Shimmy and William are 2 male protagonists in the stories. They don't have to go through what women have to go through. I mean, it's just a fact.
But you don't make them out to be evil.
No, not evil at all. I try and be intentional about the characters that I write and make them three-dimensional so that they don't only have like one side to them, right? And so you see all the sides. You see, the ups and the downs of these characters. And society has a lot to play in the way the male characters end up in the story, which is, largely unscathed.
You have said a couple of times of your goals for your historical fiction. Is this a pursuit? Is this the track now, or do you think you would go back to contemporary fiction?
Well, right now I feel like I'm definitely on a historical fiction track. It is so much fun for me. I learn so much that I wouldn't know. As I'm researching, I often have to pull myself back so that I don't slip down the rabbit hole and spend all my time researching and not enough time writing. But I have been given another story. I believe that stories choose you. And so I feel another story has chosen me, and I'm sort of in the beginning stages of working it out in my head, but it is another historical, and it's taking place in the late 40s and early 50s, maybe up through the 60s. I haven't decided yet, but I'm fascinated by this time period, and I think that there's a lot of story there that has been untold.
Your last novel, as you mentioned, Yellow Wife, was set during slavery, and now you're looking at the 1950s. So we learn a lot about these different eras and these different times.
Yeah, I think the 2 books go hand in hand. I mean, if you read Yellow Wife, it's the 1850s, so it takes you back to, you know, a really dark period of American history, right? Slavery. It shows where colorism has come from. If you look at, Phoebe in Yellow Wife, you see, she was the daughter of the master of the plantation, and so she was very light-skinned, and so she had a few more privileges than those who worked out in the field. And so when you see that colorism played out in the House of Eve in the 1950s, you see that it's just leftover baggage from slavery. And so the two books sort of they play hand in hand. You get a look at what it was like in the earlier days, and then when you get to the 1950s, you say, "Oh, okay, I could see how life is really history is really a circle. We
Right.
continue to go through the same things over and over again, and you see the similarities between the two stories."
So in this novel, The House of Eve, you have unwed mothers who are shipped off often to homes. Give us a sense of the history of that, of what you found out and how you wanted to portray that in the novel.
When I was doing my research, I came across a book by Anne Fessler called The Girls Who Went Away. And in the book, she details the true account of over 100 women or girls or teenagers who went into these maternity homes. Sometimes they were forced by their families, sometimes they went knowing what they were there to do. Once they got to the homes, oftentimes, they were treated poorly. They were meant to work and to pray. They were often run by religious orders. And, it wasn't a good place to be. The girls were shamed and they were coerced into giving up their babies. When they changed their minds, they were told that they were psychotic, that they were unfit to raise a child, that they could go to jail if they tried to keep their baby. And, this was during the time before IVF. And so, if there was a married couple that wanted to have a baby, this was the option. This was really the only option. I found that between 1943 and 1975, 1.5 million babies were born in these maternity homes and they were put up for adoption.
Eleanor so wants a baby, and there's a rage and there's a desperation, and that is something that you explore that is so painful for her.
Yeah. I don't think we talk about infertility enough. I think that there's still a lot of shame and secrecy around it. It's not something that we have embraced as a culture. And so you see it in the 1950s play out in these between these characters, but there's still a lot of pain. I was at a book club in Atlanta last week, and a woman stood up and told me about being a teen mom and how she was shamed and how she's still shamed, and she has a doctorate's degree. But when she's out with her daughter, people's like, "Oh, that looks they're giving her the evil eye, like, you guys look like sisters." And she said that shame has not gone away. And so there is a lot of shame and secrets around birth and infertility and what motherhood really turns out to be for a lot of us. And I wanted to hold a magnifying glass up so that people could see it. And again, I often try and write in a way where now we can have a conversation about these
Mm.
things. There's so many people who have this family secret, like, "Oh, I thought you were my sister, but then I found out, when I was 48 that you were really my mom." And this comes up over and over again as I'm talking to book clubs and I'm going across the country giving talks. And so I want this book to be a balm. I want it to be a place that we could use to heal some of these wounds and then figure out how are we going to move forward and how are we now going to treat each other and be different.
Did your view of motherhood change as you were meditating on this and writing it?
It has a little bit. I realize that, and this is good for me as well because I have 3 children, but I realize that every mother really is only doing the very best she can in that moment. In that moment, whatever decisions, whatever advice, whatever she's doing is the very best that she has to offer in that moment, regardless of if the child feels it or the people around them feel it. And so we have to give mothers, but we also, as mothers, have to give ourselves some grace because we are always trying to do our very, very best.
You were talking about book clubs in Atlanta and so forth. I assume you learn a lot from those experiences of talking to readers who've read the book and want to talk about it.
Absolutely. And it always opens up discussions of healing where people want to share with me. They want to share back with me their own experience
Yeah.
or their family's experience. And it's definitely a beautiful exchange of energy. I love being out in the world. I'm so glad COVID is over. I love being out in the world and being able to talk to people.
Sadeqa Johnson's new novel is The House of Eve. It is published by Simon & Schuster. Sadeqa, thank you so much for being with us. A delight to have you on our program.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. We enjoy hearing from our listeners about our shows. You can email us at book@wamc.org. You can listen again to this or find past book shows via podcast or at wamc.org. Sarah LeDuc produces our program. Bookmark us